When to begin.
I am happy to welcome everyone in. I can see we have a lot of people entering. Its number is ticking up, up to 35, 37, 38. So we'll give it a couple of minutes, Beth, and then we'll get started.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be a great program. And up to 55. Okay, it's 5:01 and there are more than 60 people who are here now. So I just want to welcome you all to today's webinar. Just to make sure you're at the correct one. This is Edward Hopper's Truro, the historical, architectural, and environmental context. And I'm very excited to have Beth Chapman here as our guide. Before we begin, I want to thank you all for your support over the course of the summer and into this fall. I've been so heartened by your enthusiasm for the series of webinars that we've offered. I think it's been one of the silver linings of the pandemic that we can welcome large groups to these programs and that you can attend from anywhere. So thank you all for your enthusiasm and your support. I also want to thank everyone who has joined the Truro Historical Society or renewed your membership this season. I want to mention, if you haven't already renewed or joined and you're interested, it's not too late. You can do that from our website very easily, and that's www.trurohistoricalsociety.org. These webinars have all been free. And so we very much appreciate your financial support. Couple of pragmatic issues about today's program. It will last about 1 hour. Beth will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll take all of your questions at the end. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in questions, and feel free to type a question as it comes to mind, and I'll go through them all after Beth is finished. Now I want to tell you a little bit about Beth Chapman. She has deep roots in Truro, and she did some research in 2009 for a tercentennial event on Edward Hopper's Outer Cape paintings, which developed into her current tour business. She opened the business in 2013, and since she started giving her Hopper tours, she has given them to more than 1,000 people. Beth is also a member of the Truro Historical Commission, which is committed to identifying and protecting Truro's historic structures and landscapes. She's also chair of the Friends of Herring River, a group devoted to returning the tide to the Herring River estuary in Wellfleet and Truro, an estuary that Hopper painted numerous times. Beth is an active member of both the Truro and Wellfleet Historical Societies, and we are really happy to have her here this afternoon to share her knowledge and enthusiasm for Edward Hopper's art and life in Truro. So take it away, Beth.
Thank you very much. And Lauren, I also want to thank the museum for having had such a schedule of very fascinating programs. I've enjoyed every one of them. And I'm so delighted that we can have people coming from anywhere that their computers allow them to connect. I am the founder of the Hopper House Tours, and it has been a fascinating experience to research this topic, because what I have insisted on doing, if I can't find a building that he painted, then I want some historical context in a photograph. So I have been using a lot of historical photos that I have found at the Historical Society to confirm my own decision that I've got the right location. He's very famous for the saying, all I want to do is paint sunlight on the side of a house. And by the way, this is his self-portrait. He was 48 in 1930, and he didn't like to do his self-portraits. So he always wore a hat because he was bald. But this is the last one that he did. He didn't do any more after this. When he came here, he was greeted with a very bare landscape because there was no native forest. The early colony from Plymouth that came over here to settle had used all of the native wood. And so it was bare as can be. And it's reflected in all of his decade of 1930 paintings. He had another issue that he had to face, and that is that almost every building here, except for some very wealthy people's homes and barns, it was gray shingles because the cedar shakes were much less expensive than the long linear clapboards. And you will look here at the houses and the sheds in this wonderfully fully executed portrait of our lighthouse, and you'll see that the house has been made white. He can't paint shadow on a on a gray house. And so he changed all of his houses either to white or to yellow. And you'll see that as we go along. The other thing to note is if you're ever over in the parking lot by the museum, you'll note that the chimney shadows don't go to the right. They go to the left when the sun is up. And that's because he painted this painting from the east cliff, if you will, of the highlands looking west. And that's why the shadows go in the direction they're going in. This is the erosion that required the lighthouse to be moved in 1996, 425 feet forward. And the keeper's cottage didn't catch up with it until a little bit later in the moving process, as you probably all know. Right now it's shrouded for repair, and we look forward to it reopening. The museum is actually the Highland House, and this is a farm. I'm sorry, it was built by a farmer as a hotel. And the museum has many of their collection rooms upstairs, and it's fascinating. So I really hope that it's open next summer and that you get to visit it. The hotel itself and the surrounding cottages that the Mr. Small owned would accommodate up to 100 people in 1905, which gives you some idea of tourism that was happening at that time. Now, this is here. It's not anywhere near the lighthouse. This is actually the South Truro Meeting House and its parsonage. And in between the two, you can see a horse and buggy. You can also see how bare this is. And if any of you have ever been to the Meeting House Park in South Truro, you'll know that it's completely shrouded in trees now. But the parsonage on the right was blown down in the gale of 1920. And a very enterprising man from North Truro said to himself, well, I can make a house out of that rubble. And he bought the rubble, moved it to North Truro, and it became the house that's the centerpiece of our second painting, called High Road. And this is the house that's midway up Shore Road from Salty's Market. That last roof line down on your left of the road is the Salty's Market roof line. And you'll see something that's very characteristic of his painting here. You'll see that he puts telephone poles in all the time, and he never puts in any wires. And that's quite typical of his work. The blue ridge in the background of this painting is not water. That is actually one of our many east-west ridges that the glacier left us with the runoff when the Cape was being formed. And that's that particular ridge is we're looking at the near side of the Little Payment River. Now, as you go down Pond Road, you'll pass a very large building on your left that was Jerry Farnsworth and Helen Sawyer's art studio, but originally it was an ice house. And we go up the right-hand road to what is absolutely, I want to use my cursor here. This is the railroad embankment. And the reason that's important is because Hopper painted 3 very beautiful paintings here at what is now known as Cold Storage Beach. And over here, you can see a bridge coming out of the 3rd floor of the cold storage plant. And that was so that the fish product could be taken to the boxcars that would inch forward after they had let the passengers out at the depot. It would inch forward until the boxcar doors were right opposite this bridge, which I found fascinating. These There are two little cottages down at Cold Storage Beach, and I'll talk about those in a moment. This is Pond Road right here, and this is Twinefield Road. And you'll note that it's all horses and buggies. So this postcard was printed before the advent of cars in Truro. This is the back of the North Truro train depot. And this is a freight building. I think this was an insurance office. And you can see, ooh, sorry. You can see that the railroad embankment went right straight across the parking lot. This is an old Bayberry candle factory. Now, originally, for the cold storage plant, they would bring the fish in with dories, put the fish into horse-drawn carts and take it up onto the shore, and then process it as salted fish. But later, when Mr. John Worthington came, they decided that they would do it differently. This shows you the train coming up to the cold storage plant bridge. The bridge is down here. So they could get the product onto the train. Mr. Worthington took one look at how they were getting fish into the building and said, we've got to do better. We need a rig out there. And this is the Cold Storage Beach rig that I am told was a rite of passage to dive off the top for many North Truro kids. You can see the large cable going from the rig to the gondola basket and then into, I want to take you back. Down here, can you see, this is the matching rig that was built up against the cold storage plant. They couldn't actually fix the cables and the gondola baskets to the plant. It wasn't built for that kind of stress, so they have a much bigger rig there. So the larger ships could tie up here, and they did, and a lot more fish went into the plant. Now, the reason this is important to the Edward Hopper story is because he was up on that railroad embankment looking down, and he painted the cold storage plant. Now, he loved industrial subjects, and he didn't have very many in Truro. So this was definitely going to be on his list. And the other things that he did all the time, he painted at least 13 or 15 times that he either painted the railroad or referenced it in one of his paintings. And the juxtaposition between the dark blue water and the bright red of the building, and then this exaggerated, this little shed was nowhere near this long. I think he was experimenting, as I see in a lot of his watercolor, he's experimenting with various kinds of styles of art. And in this case, it may have been what the other abstract artists were doing, which was to do blocks of color. This is the painting that he did of the North Truro train depot. And as any of you who are familiar with the Truro Historical Society, that sign, which says North Truro, is just as worn out now because it's on the wall of the museum and you can see it. And it is the sign from the North Truro train station. It was a small train station, but nonetheless, you can see the tracks running by in the front. And this equipment over here, this dark equipment, is the telegraph equipment. And just as he ignored telephone wires, he ignored telegraph wires as well. And this is the railroad crossing sign for both Twinefield Road and Pond Road that came right into this area. Now, in the same exact neighborhood, you will find this house, or what remains of it. And this was the brainchild of a woman who had been to Morocco and came home and said, I want a round room. Now, I'm guessing that this is probably stucco, but it is round and it's still there. But I want you to notice the gold reflection here and then the violet shadows. I think the gold reflection here and on a number of other of his paintings is reflecting a yellow native grass called Deschampsia. And it's all over. You can see it everywhere right now. It's just beautiful right now. And he put it into many, many of his South Truro and North Truro paintings. We know in all likelihood in 1931 that he was not using this blue as the color that was actually on the house. I'd love somebody to correct me on that if they know this house when in 1930. But I think it came from his paint box. He liked blue accents. He did blue shutters on places. I don't think it's a color that was sold here. It would have been a specialty paint. And during the Depression, people generally didn't invest in that. Now, this is what it looks like today. You still see the round roof is still there, but the back side of the house has been greatly expanded and there is no little turret. So I miss the turret, but the round room is still there. Edward Hopper painted almost exclusively old Cape Cod cottages. And you know, the Cape Codders, they didn't take mortgages. So they would build and live in a half house. And when they became more prosperous, they would expand the house. Some built 3/4 with 3 windows, and some built full houses with 4 windows. The other exception to the Cape Cod cottage is the Greek Revival, and many of them he painted when he was here. Now this is the smokestack from the cold storage plant, and this white building here under the telephone pole is the cold storage plant itself. It was painted white. And this is the freight building over on cold storage parking lot, which was very close to the train depot. But when you look at this painting, it's really interesting because the extension of the railroad track went right through this dune and then across this road, which is Bayshore Path, and there is a house right here. Because in 1960, the train went bankrupt, and they were required to sell their rights of way from South Wellfleet to Provincetown because Wellfleet would not allow the Cape Cod Rail Trail to continue through town. They considered it too dangerous. So there's a house right here, but all 3 of these houses are still visible. The gambrel roof house, the barn has been made into a private residence, and this is a 18th century cottage built sometime in the 1760s, 1750s, and it's in pristine condition. And it's right on the dune, getting all of the hurricanes and all of the terrific gales for the last 250 years. It's an amazing building, and I'm really tickled that he did this neighborhood. He doesn't do many neighborhoods. And also I want to point out that no wires on the telephone pole, and these are not birds. These are the glass insulators that all the telephone poles had on them. Now we're down at the vineyard. And if you go to the vineyard, you'll discover very quickly that he left out a gigantic willow tree that has to be 300 years old that takes up the entire end of the house. But the main office of the vineyard still has the double chimney, and it still has a mulberry tree, although 90 years later, this mulberry tree is much larger. And it has a sign that says that it was planted in 1871. This is called Rich's house because that was the name of the farmer. He was very wealthy, or he could never have clapboarded, bought the lumber and kept it painted of a clapboard house. All 4 walls and all of his outbuildings and barns were all clapboards. So I suspect he had a wealthy sea captain friend who was in the China trade who may have brought him a mulberry tree from China. That's what I like to think anyway. I heard a story, I don't know how true it is, that the first owners of the vineyard could not get permission from the town of Wellfleet to put up a billboard facing Route 6 that said, Truro Vineyards, come and have some wine. So they got turned down because Truro's town signage law is 4 feet by 4 feet. So they took this painting in and said, can we replace the windmill? And somewhere between the yes and the reconstruction of the windmill, which is there today, a very large cask got put on top of it. So the cask says nothing, but it's definitely indicating that there's a vineyard there. This is the vineyard's barn, and he painted it from the south looking north. It distinctly has a long back roof line. If you're looking at it from in back of the crush pad food truck, you can see the extended long line. Now, what I find fascinating is that this is true realism to me, and this could be Andrew Wyeth, and it could have been painted in Maine. And I get the biggest kick out of the fact that these are a year apart. They're the same man. He definitely was experimenting with the concepts that he was wanting to use with his watercolor, not so much with the oils, but he definitely experimented in a lot of ways. And I'll point out those impressionist approaches as we get there. This is another one. When he painted the Cornhill cottages, we all sort of recognize them, but we know they're all in a straight line. And he did not put them in a straight line, nor did he show a distinct difference in the size of the dining hall as compared to the little cottages. Now, this is an 1890s cottage complex. It was built by a real estate syndicate that felt very strongly that it wasn't going to be fishing that was going to support this end of the Cape. It was going to be tourism. And they thought they better build some cottage colonies. And if they're going to build a cottage colony, they better build a dining hall. So the big building that you can see when you look at this is the dining hall. And what's missing after the 1930 fire, they completely replaced all of this when it burned down to the ground, but they didn't replace the Governor Bradford Hotel. This is what it looks like from the water. And the Governor Bradford was to the left as far as I understand. It didn't take very long for private property owners to love this hill too, because it's got such an absolutely beautiful view. In 1940, Edward Hopper painted a painting of a gas station. Now, when I looked it up on an art print site, it said that this was the #1 selling art print of all of his work. And I kind of can believe that, because I can't tell you the number of people that have said, oh, I own that. And I think it's the kind of a thing, it's an Edward Hopper, it's kind of mannish, and it could go in a man cave, it could go in a family room. But what is really interesting is he's really painting at dusk, because the lights are on. There's lights on the sign, as you can see, but there's lights also spilling out of the office across the pavement. Now, this gas station of ours in Truro, he said he used 3 different gas stations from 3 different towns. Ours was where the firewood concession is, south of the Wellfleet landfill. So that hill that you go up to get into the Truro landfill, the hill that you drive up to get to Wellfleet, you see firewood being sold on the right-hand side, and that's where this gas station was. Now, in the 1980s, they had a bad gas leak, and they were leasing the property from the Cape Cod National Seashore, who would no longer allow them to be a gas station. They tore up all the pumps, which by this point in 1980 had been changed, but they left this little white building. And unfortunately, about 8 years ago, one of the firewood people left a space heater on, and the little white office building burned down. So now you can only see the firewood signs. You can't see any vestige of the painting. This has absolutely nothing to do with Cape Cod painting, and absolutely everything to do with how they painted. Josephine was 5 feet tall, and they would push the bench seat of their old cars way far forward, and she would use a piece of masonite as her easel and then paint on that. He was 6 feet 5, and that would give him huge amounts of space in the back seat. This is Jo in Wyoming. Her diary says that they had found Mexico way too warm in 1946, and they had somehow gotten themselves to the Grand Tetons. So this is Jo's version of Mount Moran, and Hopper painted the same painting. And I should say that because she went everywhere that he drove, she was gregarious. She needed to get out of the isolation of both the rental cottage in South Truro and then their studio. So their Cape Cod portfolios are very similar. And also when they were traveling, their portfolios are quite similar. They painted the same things. Edward painted the Herring River estuary into the backgrounds of 11 of his paintings. And this is one of my very great passions, is to remove the dike down here at the Quezet Neck Road and allow the salt water to get way back in here. Now, Edward Hopper was painting up here. Up here is where his rental cottage was, but it was estuary when he was painting, because it's in the backgrounds of all his paintings, and it looks like an estuary. On Old County Road in South Truro, going north, this is the Schumann house. And this is the end that you can see from the road. Now, it has recently undergone a complete reconstruction, really, but they did replace all the windows with 9 panes of glass over 6 panes of glass, which is a typical 18th century Cape Cod cottage kind of window. There were no doors on this east end, and there now is a door and a porch. So it's changed dramatically. But the Whitney never published a color photo of this painting. It's in a private collection. I don't know why. I think this may be in the yard of the Schumann house, and I believe it's a privy. And Josephine in her notes wrote that it was a chicken coop. I think she was too much of a lady to actually put the word privy into her notes. So I think that's the same piece of property. Now, as you go around the corner on Old County Road and you approach something many of you know as the yellow house, the Marshall's house, that is the house you're looking at in this photo. And up above it is a farmhouse with a barn to the left. And that is my family's farm. And that's our barn. And that's a big sand dune in back of the barn. And then over here, you can see the railroad embankment. The railroad goes right in back of this dune and on into Cobb Farm. So it was very much a part of life in the Lewis farm. But I'm here right now to talk about the Marshall's house, because this is the same house, and this is where Edward Hopper rented on Prince Valley Road on the side of the hill. And he rented here in 1930, 31, 32, and 33. And then Josephine got a major inheritance in 1933, and they hired a Brookline, Massachusetts contractor who came and built their studio for them near Fisher Beach. Now this is their shack. It was called the birdcage because the rain came through the roof and the wind came through the siding. But I got this photo from the Gene and Bill Cooper family, and it was Bill's grandfather's 1920s, 1930s album. And the back of this photo says Bill, and he's the little boy with the short pants here. And he was, they said 7 years old in 1932. This smirch up here in the screen porch is Edward Hopper yelling at the Coopers to stop making so much noise. They were disturbing his painting. He needed a great deal of quiet, up to and including sending Josephine to the kitchen of their studio when her brush strokes were bothering him. Not her voice, but her brush strokes. The post office used to rent rooms in farmers' barns and then give the title of postmaster to the farmer, and that's how they got their branch offices. And the Coopers had a very short walk to get around the block to get here. I'll show you that in just a minute on another painting that Hopper did. Now, this is the painting that Edward Hopper did of the Marshall's house. It's been in the Marshall family since 1919. It's an 1841 Greek revival. And the youngest Marshall is John Marshall Jr., and his dad said to him in 1982, you know, we need to paint the house this summer at the Cape. And John Jr. said, gee, Dad, do you think we could paint it yellow or cream? And his dad said, why would we do that? It's been white since it was built. And John Jr. said, Dad, I'm an artist. I want it to look as much like the Hopper painting as possible. So now John Jr. has done that, and he's really, he's painted the entire house yellow, which it never was. As you can see, Hopper painted the right-hand side with clapboards, which it had. It was an all clapboard house. It was a wealthy Cobb house. And he used a great deal of energy painting the shadows of each one of the clapboards. And then I think he got tired and he did a yellow wash on the gable end of the house. This is the facing this, ooh, sorry. That's the facing the street end of the house. Now I want you to notice very, very beautiful grass that Edward Hopper has painted into the bottom of this watercolor. It's also a much close-up of this house than most of his paintings. Most of his paintings he paints further away with more foreground. But you can see that he actually used a stylus of some kind and scraped the yellow paint off to make the indication of this Deschampsia native ground cover. Further down the road is the railroad warning location where Ryder Beach Road went up and over the railroad tracks and down toward Ryder Beach. Oops, sorry, wrong way. This is the train coming from Provincetown to pick up the Coopers at the South Truro Depot. And it actually is a Cooper family photo. This is an old photo of the same depot. And this is my family's farm. The two-story is the bedroom wing. This is the kitchen wing. And this is the barn. And this is the big sand dune. But what I really want to point out is several details here in this photo that absolutely galvanized me. My cousin had this on the wall of the Lewis farmhouse. And I said, why do you have this? And she said, it's the only portrait we've ever seen of all the buildings, including the chicken coop, of the Lewis farm. But I was more interested in this little box. This is a coal box. They actually kept coal here for the Franklin stoves inside the depot. And this is kind of a start on a Greek revival column that never got finished. So I put those two things together. And this is what Edward Hopper painted of the South Truro Depot. This is the south-facing end. Here is that very strange trim that is definitely unique to the South Truro Depot. I've looked at all the other depot pictures and paintings, and none of them have this partially completed column. And here is the coal box. Now, this is the interesting thing, because there is nowhere that Edward Hopper could have seen these things in juxtaposition with a straight view of what I think are the Ryder Beach dunes. I think he made them the gold. I think the dark green is meant to be the marsh. And I think the gray here is the rails. But if I go back one, there is a very large hill right here, right in front of where this box is. So this is a good example of him taking elements from a neighborhood and creating what he wanted to create, which is his artistic license. And in the real painting is much bluer sky. It's a typical Cape Cod blue sky. It's very beautiful. And he came back the next year and he did the boxcar. Every boxcar at every depot in Truro had a second set of rails that they would keep the boxcar on, and that was used as the shed to keep the area around the depot clean and neat. Further down Old County Road and out into the middle of the marsh is this wonderful Rider house that it was a shingled house, and he painted it entirely as white. The critics have said that this is the most isolated and lonely of all of his Cape paintings. I think it was uninhabited. I asked the owner when her grandfather had actually purchased it. She said 1938, so it's after the Depression. More than 50% of Truro vacated Truro to go find a place to eat and to feed their children that was not Truro at the time. And so this may have been unoccupied, but I don't think it was abandoned. This is what it looks like today. And the owner keeps the long wall of the shed painted white in honor of the Hopper painting. But as you can see, it's a gray shingled house. Now, this house was the first house that this family built in South Truro, and they built it right on top of the water, as you can see. The granddaughters took my tour, and they told me that when the well went brackish, they actually abandoned this house, and then they built this one. And this one you can see by the end of Rider Beach Road. It's in the far distance, and it's the only house on the horizon that has the chimney. It has a shed roof porch that goes far down on the right, and they tell me now that this shed roof porch is right smack dab on the edge of the dune, and they have no place they can further back the house up to get it away from the water. It appears that they used to come from the south, from the Rider Beach Road extension to get to this house. And now it's approached only by Boundbrook Island and some of the roads up there. This is at the corner. He was painting from the corner of Old County Road and Rider Beach Road. I think he put this post in, which no artist ever does, puts a vertical in the middle of his painting. But I think he put this post in because he wanted to show foreground, but he really did not have his perspectives very well. These hills look like somewhere in the Midwest, foothills of the Rockies maybe. They're not typical Cape Cod dunes. This is our tippy barn that did get blown down in the 1938 hurricane. It was just a pile of lumber when I was a kid in the late 40s, 10 years later. This is the only part of the farmhouse that still exists. All of the other outbuildings are gone. This is what it looks like this week. So if you're at the corner of Old County Road and Rider Beach Road, look down into the marsh. It's gorgeous. It's all swamp maple. This is the photo that got me on this quest. I was in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I was holding a book of Hopper paintings, the complete watercolors of Edward Hopper. I opened it up and found this painting. Now I was looking for it because I knew the Lewises had this on their wall, and I knew he'd painted the farmhouse, but I didn't know he'd painted it or elements of it 5 times, which he did do. This is fascinating to me because the Whitney, when they received the legacy gift from Josephine, Catherine Whitney had lobbied Edward for a long time to give the legacy gift to the Whitney, which he ultimately did. Josephine had to make that happen. And when she gave this to the Whitney, she said, unknown location. Let me back up. That's our hill. That's our hill and our 2-story. No question, these are our buildings. It's our farm, but the Whitney doesn't know that. Hopper confused Josephine because he made Cape Cod Bay into a mountain, and he has a tsunami of water coming in the dunes. And the other interesting thing to me is that this is unfinished, it's unsigned, but look, he's using negative space. He's not doing his usual architectural preciseness. And that is very much an impressionist trick, and this is one of his many watercolor impressionist kinds of tries. He painted our barn. This is the only time he ever really made an effort to show shingles, but he obviously got tired just as he did on the Marshall's house, and the gable end is a kind of a wash of gray. And this pond does exist, but this is the intersection of Rider Beach Road and Old County, and he was standing here when he painted that painting called Roads and Houses. This is my dad, 1920. This is his cousin. This is one cow with the head down, one cow with the head up, and that's my great uncle John. And my dad was a summer boy starting in 1920. He couldn't get here fast enough and he never wanted to leave. This is my great uncle Dave Lewis and my great uncle John Lewis. And Dave would come down every summer from Somerville. He had helped John build the farm when they were kids. They were 18 and 19 when they were kids when they built it. They were from Provincetown. The property was inherited by John. It was Nehemiah Rich's property, according to some historical documents I saw recently. But Dave would come down and give John his annual haircut, whether he needed it or not. And my first cat came from one of these buildings, and the men had cats all the time. And I love that cat. Now this, I appreciate this picture more than any of the family pictures, because this is my great uncle John delivering his eggs and milk in Wellfleet, in downtown Wellfleet on Main Street. This building is Hannah's clothing store. And I found it by the quality or lack of the trim around the windows. And over here would be the driveway to the Methodist church. Now think about it. He milked his cows, obviously scalded the milk can, milked his cows, got on the train at the South Truro Depot. The reason he put up with little boys as his summer guests is because he could carry the egg basket, he could carry the milk can, but he couldn't carry the vegetable baskets. So the boys would get on the train with him. They'd get off at Mac's Shack, which is where the Wellfleet main depot was. And he would walk to customers all through downtown Wellfleet. I love this. This is me just before my 3rd birthday. I was born during the war, and my mother was a real sleuth at getting film, but she could only get enough for vacation. So all of my baby pictures are taken in August, our vacation weeks, for the first 3 years of my life. And I didn't find them until I was in my 50s, and they were in a vacation album. My mother never took them out and made a baby album. So my nose was out of joint my entire life because I didn't think I had a baby album. This is Josephine and Edward. She painted with him every day. He would not allow her to drive. They painted the same things. She'd been painting and showing with prestigious artists, and he had the audacity to say to her when they got married, I don't think that there's enough room in this family for 2 painters. And she took that to mean, I guess I better stop selling my paintings because I'm not going to stop painting. And until she had introduced him to her gallery, he'd only sold 1 piece of fine art in 10 years. And I don't think we would know the Edward Hopper we know now if she had not gotten him away from illustrations. He was earning his living until he was 50, doing illustrations for trade publications. But she got him introduced to her gallery. She also egged him on, and when he was 50, he competed in something called the Purchase Prize, which is, at the time, it was a national watercolor competition. And she convinced him to put one of his Gloucester paintings in it, and he won. And the prize was a solo show in a prestigious Manhattan gallery in 1932, smack dab in the middle of the Great Depression. He sold every painting. So that would have made great art news. And she then took over the business of keeping track of his paintings, and on many of the sketches that he did a sketch before every painting. She would write down the notes of which gallery had sold it, how much, and sometimes who had purchased it. But nowhere on these notes, which have been preserved and have been published by the Whitney, does he say ever where he was when he was painting these or creating these drafts, these cards. And I think it's because he didn't want people to know that he, with a reputation as a realist, had so often taken so much artistic liberty and experimented so much. Josephine writes in her diary, Eddie, that's what she said when she liked him, Eddie wants me to Eddie wants me to pose for him. I don't want to pose for him. I pose for him enough as it is, and that's because she was his only female model. And she said, I'm making him paint me painting. And this is the only portrait that he ever did of her. And it's lovely, and she is painting. This is a watercolor that's on display at the Truro Historical Museum. It's on Masonite, and I love it. She painted it in our orchard. Here's the dead tree, and that dead tree fell over in 2013, so you can't see it anymore. This is another one of those areas in our neighborhood in South Truro where he took elements from the immediate neighborhood and created a painting out of the elements, even though there's no site for this painting. This is our barn, I think, falling down the back of our hill that faced the railroad track. And that's the Marshall's house. He took the porch off the Marshall's house, pulled the kitchen wing forward, and even kept the Greek Revival door. And he named it New York, New Haven, and Hartford to honor the railroad. Now, going around the corner to Prince Valley Road, there's a red 3/4 cape that you all have seen if you use Prince Valley Road. That was Burley Cobb's farmhouse, and this was his shack. When Hopper painted this painting, which he named Post Office because that's what the sign said over the barn, he greatly exaggerated the distance. They're really much closer together, and the barn was much closer down the side of the hill. This is what the shack looks like today. They lived there for 4 summers, 30, 31, 32, and 33, tolerated the leaky ceilings. They lived on this porch because this porch down here with 5 of these windows was just screened porch when they lived here. It's now been upgraded to a 3-season porch. But he could see Cape Cod Bay from this 5th window because there were no trees on this site at all. There was a chicken coop right down the hill from where they lived. And the chicken coop is in 5 of the backs of the barn paintings. And this is the estuary. And he painted the estuary into 5 paintings. This hill is completely covered with pine trees, but it was very bare when he was painting. And when my brother and I were little, we used to slide down it on cardboard, waxed cardboard cartons. We had a ball. This is from that window. This is Cape Cod Bay, the dunes of Ryder Beach. This is the embankment going over to the original location of the South Truro train depot. And here is the estuary. And of course, here is the chicken coop. I love this palette. And here's the chicken coop. He didn't finish the painting, but he made a really heroic try at the Deschampsia grass. Here's the estuary. Here's the Marshall's house with the 2 red roofs. This is the Cooper's cottage. Both of these still are there. This you can see, this one's lost in the woods, in the trees. And the bright sunshine on the roof line, which he loved to do. This is an oil. Now this is fascinating because the Whitney chose to put this as the dust jacket of the collection they made of the complete oil paintings of Edward Hopper. Now think about that for a minute, because the oil paintings are by and large well known for the urban paintings, but the Whitney put this gorgeous South Truro painting on the cover. And I think I know why. It's a spectacularly beautiful painting. We got the chicken coop, the bright sunshine on the back of the barn, the Herring River estuary, and the Marshall's house and their 1-car garage, which is still there today. You can see it when you drive by. The Marshall's house is the most accessible Hopper house in all of Truro. So if you pass Prince Valley Road on your left, it's the next house on your left. This is the back of the Burley Cobb farmhouse. I want you to see this notch. This is one of those watercolors that he decided to do later in oil. He did that a lot. Guess where the oil ended up? This is the Oval Office at the White House. Here's the back of the Burley Cobb barn in oil, and this is the back of the Burley Cobb, I'm sorry, the barn. This is the back of the Burley Cobb farmhouse, and this is the back of the Burley Cobb barn. And the Whitney had evidently loaned the Obamas at least 52 different slides to choose from. And surprisingly for an urban couple, they chose the very pastoral setting of South Truro painted on that porch that I just showed you, their shack. Now we're going over to the South Truro Meeting House Park. All it is now is a big stone that commemorates the existence of this church. The church failed in 1925. They gave the keys to the town. The town took until 1936 to find a preservation group. No sooner had they raised the money to paint this church than it was struck by lightning and burned down. But this is where that house came from, the parsonage that I talked to you about in North Truro. And here is the horse and buggy. So the next paintings were painted from the backyard, this backyard of the church location. If a scholar is actually going to talk about Edward Hopper at all, his Cape Cod paintings, they often use this one. It's a stunning example of how to do a landscape with beautiful shadows. He immortalized this dune in the next called Camel's Hump. He painted the church in his architectural style, did a really good job of it. Josephine did the same day, the same thing. She did it in watercolor. Edwards was in oil. She gave it a halo, and you can really see how bare this area was. This church was so outstanding as a structure that it was a mariner's locating device. Captains out in the middle of Cape Cod Bay could figure out where they were based on the church steeple. This is a wedding picture from the Cooper family. And if you look down here at this guy in the boater in the dark doorway, that gives you some, if he's just an average size guy, 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", look how big this door is and how very tall the steeple was. It was a very big building. This is the studio that was opened and lived in 1934. And the viewscape included the Jeunesse house down here. He painted it often. He painted it 8 times by my count. This is my favorite, and I want you to notice this slant red roof here. He put that house in the background of this painting. I think he was honoring the window. The window is 12 feet tall and 10 feet wide and was made up of 36 different panes of glass. And Josephine was known for her horizontal jerseys and her red kerchiefs. And I just love the palette in this painting. This is the Jeunesse house today. This is the painting he did from the porch, but he did it in 1965. He wasn't here in 1965. His last summer was 64. In 67, he died. He wasn't well enough to travel again to Truro. Josephine gave the cottage their studio in 1968 to her friend Mary Schiffenhaus, and the Schiffenhauses own it to this day. It's private property on a very private road. This is the studio from a long distance away. It's a New York Times telephoto of the south end of the Hopper studio, but it shows you how beautifully unbuilt up the dunes were as compared to what happened later. And this is the Klein Dennis house, which is 8,700 square feet. And this is the Hopper studio, which is 1,000 square feet. Enough said. Now, as we leave this area and we go down Fisher Road, there is a little peek through the trees that allows you to see this house. This road comes in off of Old County, but it's a very substandard road, also private. This is Captain Kelly's house, and I think he was intrigued by the railroad and the railroad embankment. He came back the next year and did it in oil, the railroad embankment. Notice the blue shutters. He did that all the time. And then he painted, well, this is what it looks like today. Then, oh, where's my, oh, I'm missing a painting. He painted something called Railroad Embankment. I apologize. Has blue shutters. The embankment takes up a quarter of the painting. This is at the very end of Fisher Road, Lost in the Woods. It's called Locust Trees, and it's the back door. This is a shed. This is the back door, and it's a very small cape. And this is what it looks like today. Here's the shed, and here's the back door. This is on Mill Pond Road, and it is fantastically beautiful. I love the grass. And I want you to know that it is still there. And this was a 2013 photo, and the house has continued to deteriorate. So that's sad to me, but it's there. Now we're down at the mouth of the Pamet River, and Edward Hopper wants you to believe that he could see the trestle from where he pretends to be high enough to paint this part of the house. But if you're painting this house at this angle, you could never have seen a trestle. It would have been here, not to the right. And he also got the perspective wrong. This, however, is very interesting to me because this shows you the little Pamet River when it actually was an active river coming off of Pamet Harbor. But later, the culverts got sanded in and it became a freshwater marsh on the other side of Cornhill. This is the actual trestle itself. 2 passenger cars, a boxcar, and a train engine. My rite of passage was to dive off at almost high tide. That's what we did when we begged our dad to bring us over, and he waited until a half an hour before high tide so we wouldn't break our necks. And this is the same house I showed you before, but this is the west side, and it is, I love this painting. I don't know if it was actually, he painted it yellow in his head because it was gray shingles, which it is now, or if it was new shingles at the time, because this house I've watched be shingled, and the new shingles are quite yellow. And this is taken in the middle of the winter, so you can see that the only difference is the handrail and the 2 extra windows in the back of the wing. Now, this I just got into this PowerPoint today. The Whitney has notes that says that this is the North Truro station. They are wrong. This is a photograph of the Pamet River Depot, the train depot. It's almost identical. All of the elements of the painting are in this photograph. So the Whitney is, again, can't be right all the time, big guy, but they're wrong on this one. And I'm so excited. And thank you, Jay Vivian, for finding this photo for me when I asked him about it. Because I had the North Truro depot in my head, and it's a small depot. And I knew the South Truro depot had that really weird, almost unfinished Greek Revival column, but it was nothing like these. And so I'm so tickled to add this. This is a painting that I always knew had to be at Pamet because it's the only freight station that was close enough to the water to have a boat. So then I found this at the Cobb Archive of the Truro Historical Society. Here's the boat on the side of the river. Here is a long brown embankment. Here is the freight station with a bump out. This is a privy, and here's the boxcar. So he put the freight building, the bump out, the box, the privy, the dory, the boxcar, and the embankment all into something that pleased him immensely. Now, quick rundown, South Pamet. You all recognize this in one way or another. He painted it, I can't see the date, but it was in the late 30s, I think. This is what it looked like more recently after they raised it up out of the sand, which really amused me because it started looking like the painting. But it hadn't for many, many years. It was just so much sand. And then, as we all know, it got removed because of the great breakthrough of the dunes, causing it to be a danger and a maritime hazard. This is Ballstown. These are the little cottages. They were there when I was a kid. And I used to be able to play with the kids that came to spend time in those cottages. And this is the only one that's left. And it's way far away from the walkway to Ballston Beach now. This is going back down South Pamet Road. This is Mooney's farm, and you'll see cows out there. Edward Hopper left out a huge tree right here, and now this barn is gone, as you can see by this, but all the telephone poles. Here's a tree. Do you see the big, huge tree that Hopper left out again? But this is the same house. This is my current research. Diana Worthington tells me that this is the house on the end of Collins Road and South Pamet. The grandson of the man who had a Stutz Bearcat race car tells me that this is the house that's on the end of Collins Road and South Pamet corner. But I can't find a single thing in the existing house, which is a 3/4 cape. I can't find anything that resembles any of this. So I'm looking for some old pictures that might show the house. And what Diana said, and it makes sense, the people that own it now took all the Victoriana off of it. But I also think this may be the house where Cape Cod Morning was painted. So I'd really like to know more about the Victoriana elements of this house. Now, can't finish a Hopper tour without talking about an almost $100 million sale of the painting Chop Suey. It's considered his masterpiece. It sold in November of 2018. And look at all of the shafts of light and the color, very abstract in that sense, but these people are very realistic, except that they're not talking to each other. They're obviously busy with other things. That's in keeping with the distancing that he has in so many of his paintings. What I love, though, is the red hat, the red teapot. Ooh. Oh. Up, the red teapot and the Chop Suey sign. And I just love that they come through the entire painting. This is Columbus Circle in New York, a second floor Chinese restaurant. So a lot of other paintings have sold for a lot of money, but that's the end of this tour.
Thank you, Beth. That was fabulous. What a thorough look through all of his work here in Truro. That was just amazing. What I've been wondering, like, what is the number of paintings that he created over? It was a 30-year span when he was here for summers.
You know, I think Henry Lum has actually documented them and listed them by date, and I'll share that document with you, Lauren. I think it's close to 169 when you count from Provincetown to Orleans. But the bulk of them were in South Truro, really. He did the bulk of his work in South Truro.
Right. Okay, we have our first question. Oh, a comment. Ellen Anthony said, fabulous, thank you. We're open to any and all of your questions or thoughts or feedback, so we'll hang here for a little bit and you can submit your questions and Beth will stay for a bit.
One of the anecdotes that I always got a big kick out of is that Josephine didn't cook, and Edward was mad at her for their entire married life because she didn't cook, and she was mad at him for expecting her to. Remember that she had been selling her own artwork for 16 years before they met at an art conference. And so the word is that they would invite themselves to any dinner party or cocktail party that they heard about, and he would go to the hors d'oeuvre table and load a plate and stand in the darkest corner he could find because he was not communicable. He didn't communicate. He was deeply introverted. Didn't like people, got grumpy to end conversations. And Josephine would fill a plate and gregariously go about and enjoy the party. So that's one of the anecdotes that I've heard about them.
Interesting. Jane Weissman said, what a wonderful tour. Thank you, Beth, and is interested to find out if Hopper painted Provincetown.
Yes, he did. He painted 7 or 8 very beautiful paintings in Provincetown. And he loved to say that he never set foot in Provincetown. And people took that to mean that he had such great disdain for the abstract artists and the impressionists. But as I've shown you, he was experimenting with those 2 types of painting. The reason he said that is because he painted from his car. As I explained when they were in Wyoming, he painted from his car all the time. He did not want to take the risk of putting an easel on the ground and having wet paint and somebody coming up behind him and saying, oh, hi, how are you? He didn't want a small chat at all, small talk. He didn't want any of that. So that's what happened.
Did he ever set up an easel and do plein air painting?
Not that I know of. I think he was much more given to doing drawings and taking them back to his easel. Because remember, he needed real quiet. And when you look at the spare nature of these drawings, and then you look at the complexity of the paintings, you begin to understand that he did an awful lot of the composition in his head, and he would need a lot of quiet to do that.
Okay. A question from Susan Solomon. Can we, yes, this webinar is being recorded, and we will post a link to our website. And another thank you from Nan Porter and Fred Goldsmith. Lovely talk. Thank you, Beth. Joyce Zavorkas would like to know whether the train station got moved to Route 6A.
No one's ever asked me that, Joyce. I don't know the answer. I know the South Truro Depot is now a private residence, but I don't know what happened to the North Truro Depot or to the Pamet River Depot. But it makes sense. Do you know where on 6A, I guess is the question. I'll look at it and see what I figure out.
Another question from Tara Chabra. How did Hopper choose the houses that he painted?
I have always thought, and this is a little flip, but I've always thought that he was a little bit lazy, and so it had to be easily accessible because he has 32 paintings that he painted within a mile of his shack on the hill on Prince Valley, and a great many more that are within a mile of his studio that was only a half mile away, but he painted more northerly. So I think he was opportunistic in terms of what he could get to easily. I don't think we all have a very good understanding of how bare this area was, and he could see from a great distance all kinds of houses and structures, and he could then drive over, mosey over, and decide whether it would suit his purposes. That's the best answer I can come up with. I've never read a really good answer to that. I think, though, in case of our farm, I think he was looking for roof lines because there were so many outbuildings. I think he really enjoyed painting roof lines. Because, you know, they're very complicated in the barn pictures that he did on the hill, the Burley Cobb barns as well as the Lewis farm.
Karen Brady was wondering what brought Hopper to the Cape initially?
I have to think that they're living in Washington Square in Greenwich Village. Josephine wants to spend her summers in Provincetown. Edward wants to spend his summers in Gloucester. She's having nothing to do with a sleeping fishing village, and he's having nothing to do with the cheek to jowl. And so I think of Provincetown, I think they were drawn by the expressions of how beautiful the light was by the other artists that they were regularly seeing in Greenwich Village. That's my best answer. And they could have gone to Maine because they did a lot of painting in Maine, and they did travel. They did a lot of painting in Vermont, but they chose Cape Cod for their studio. And I'm guessing it's because of the famous Cape Cod light.
Makes sense to me. Beth, do you have any Hopper books that you would recommend?
Well, that's a good question. I am currently balancing my computer on top of my Complete Watercolors of Edward Hopper by Gail Levin, and it's out of print. But if you can find it, it's the most complete look at all of his watercolors. There is a matching volume that's also out of print. These were both published by the Whitney in the late 1990s, and I bought mine in the 1990s. But they are, even if you go to a library and ask to see them, they're well worth thumbing through. And then the libraries, both in Truro and in Provincetown, have got their ledger book size books. They're hard to put in the stacks, actually. They're tall and narrow, and they've got 3 of his drawings, and they're organized by the title of the painting. And that's also worth going to the libraries to see. I don't know if they're still available, but I doubt it.
Okay, thank you.
To put my firstborn son through college for this in the late 1990s, but I had to have it.
Sam Cafferson is interested in finding out where the railroad ran through cold storage. Was it along the beach or up on the hill overlooking the beach?
It was that parking lot. And when you're up in the parking lot and you've just gotten there, look right, there's a slat fence that keeps you from walking on the railroad bed. And just before you get fully up past the guard's the guard building, look left and you'll see a house up on the hill. The railroad went all the way across the long section of the top of that parking lot and then out the left-hand corner of the split rail fence and all the way over to the left side of the house that you can see when you're looking south from the parking lot. It was that high. Or really, I should say the rest of the landscape around there is that low because that particular section of track didn't change much. It went all the way down to Corn Hill and then over the Pamet River on a trestle and then on through the marsh and through South Truro. And it was always on the bay side. It was never on the ocean side.
Question from Tara Chabra. Given your childhood spent here during some times, do you or your family members have memories of the Hoppers?
Well, my dad distinctly disliked him. And you will pull this anecdote out of me. In 1934, when Hopper and when Josephine and Edward were first inhabiting their new studio, Edward was out in front of the studio one day looking down at a sandbar that formed everywhere. And he yelled down and he said, "Hey, you, get the hell off my clams." And my dad looked up and said, "There anybody who digs them, you SOB," because my dad thought that Edward Hopper was an entitled, arrogant New Yorker. And he had very serious problems with that, you know. So he and my mother avoided the Hoppers, and my mother said Josephine always looked very unhappy. But Josephine, was a good friend of my cousin's mother, and it's not everybody is a gregarious salesman like my dad who expects that people would like to chat, you know, which Edward Hopper did not want to do. But the other part about that interaction that they had is that Edward Hopper painted the family farm 5 times. All in the early 30s. My dad was there. There were very few people in the neighborhood and he knew who my dad was. So to yell, "Hey, you," at my dad is irritated my father. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Interesting comment from Jay Vivian. Jay says, "I haven't been able to confirm it, but one source says the Cornhill Flagstaff building was sold to Fat Francis and he moved it 100 yards to the south to build the dog kennel just west of the train tracks at the west end of Tom's Hill for his very controversial pack of quite nasty German shepherds." So there's a little local color.
I remember Fat Francis.
There are a number of questions and comments in the chat that I wanted to go through. I think that I've gone through all the questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your fantastic questions. Who sold Chop Suey in 2018?
I don't know, and the auction house is under no obligation to tell us who bought it, but it went into private hands, or the museum that got it would have touted it to the skies. So I think this is something you're going to see more and more, where wonderful pieces of art are going to be purchased into private hands. There's so much money in the world, and some museums are selling the lesser known Hoppers to build up their funds for keeping their collections current. So we may see an odd Hopper here and there that are coming out of museums, but we don't know who has it. I'm sure that the auction house knows, but they're under no obligation to tell.
A question from Barbara Kearney. You mentioned their love of parties. The Hoppers were neighbors of the McGees, who apparently threw a lot of parties. Do you know anything about a possible friendship between Colonel McGee and Nellie Cobb? Well,
I knew Colonel McGee and Nellie when I was a child. he had a maid who saved us eggs for Saturday morning because we came down every Friday night and went home every Sunday night. And he ran a gentleman's egg farm. And I don't know about the parties. We were not socially active with the Cobbs and the McGees, let's put it that way. But his maid liked my dad a lot.
Okay, there's a comment from Karen Uberwasser. I think the answer to where the depot was moved could be 525 Shore Road. The owners of the small house behind the 3 cottages told me it had been a depot.
Oh, I'll look. 525 Shore.
Shore Road. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much. I want to go see it.
Janet Lundstrom mentioned that the MFA had a wonderful exhibit a few years ago where she bought a beautiful book, and it's possible you can go to mfa.org. They may still have it. I'm not sure whether it's still in publication, but that's a nice point. Thanks, Janet. Francie Randolph, wonderful talk. Beth, which other artists do you think influenced Hopper?
Oh boy, that's a controversy that's just come up in the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure. I know that he has been linked to another artist, but I also know that he was an illustrator for so much of his life. And then that certainly moves over into his own fine art and the structural, architectural art that he did. But I really don't have a good answer for you, Francie. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that.
Herb Chasson, please discuss the lack of trees and then the planting of new trees.
Well, these trees were not planted. Anything you see today was not planted unless it's a maple tree in a yard. The way I understand it is that the early settlers from the Plymouth colony who settled here by 1800 had used up all the wood. There was no more lumber industry here, no native wood. It had to be imported, which is one reason why falling down stacks of rubble were valuable to people, because used wood never was wasted. It was always reused here. And then what happened after the early 1800s is the wind from storms, from hurricanes and gales, it kept blowing the topsoil off. And the only things that the farmers here could actually get to grow, and I don't mind if somebody contradicts me, I understood it was goats and sheep. And there are actually some evidence of that on the hill that Hopper painted, that you can see where the sheep grazed horizontally on a very steep hill. But by 1899, I'm told 73% of Truro was pasture. And then you go forward to the end of the First World War, and then particularly after the end of the Second World War, so we're up to 1945, the kids did not come back to a small farm to share it with their many brothers and sisters on a 2-mile wide spit of land. They'd can't keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris is the song. And these kids didn't come back. The farms went, the pastures started with cedar trees first. And these pitch pine that you see and this oak is the natural end of a succession hardwood forest. When the Pilgrims first got here, they were greeted with so much deciduous hardwood, big trees, that they decided it would take them too long to chop down enough trees to create farmland. That's one of the very serious reasons why they left Provincetown Harbor and went to Plymouth, because Plymouth was already cleared. It had been a Native American village.
Mark McGrath was curious to know, Beth, if Nighthawk came onto the market, how much do you think it would go for?
Maybe 200 million. Nighthawk is not owned by the Whitney. As you all may know, it's owned by the Art Institute of Chicago. And I think if the Whitney had owned it, it might have ended up on the oil book on the cover, but they didn't own it. So they chose South Truro, which pleases me immensely.
Jason Schuss said, thank you for this great presentation. Love the Ryder Beach area, but missed the beginning. Other than Ryder's house, what other paintings depicted the immediate Ryder Beach area?
House on Hilltop. The other one is called, I forget what it's called. But he also did the railroad warning, and he did the South Truro depot called Coal Box. He did a boxcar there. But that's, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, about 6 in the immediate Ryder Beach area.
Okay. One final question from Barbara Cole. Is there any way I might access a list of the actual locations of the works that you spoke about tonight?
Well, actually, I've never been willing to do that because they're all private property. And I do have a list of the roads they're on. And if you would like to contact me, I can easily send you that list. Broken down by the names of the paintings. So I'm happy to do that.
Terrific. All right. Thank you, Beth. Wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And we will try to keep our webinars coming. I am open to suggestion. If you have any ideas for future programs, please reach out to me, director@trurohistoricalsociety.org. I would love to see you at future programs. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Thank you especially to Beth for a fantastic program. Have a great night.